This daf we're going to be learning is Nazir daf Samach Dalid. We are really almost at the end. Again, quick reminder: there's no regular Zoom on Thursday morning because we'll be learning Thursday evening at the Siyum. Again, if you're in Manhattan and you want to hear a Shiur by Rabbanit and get together with other women in the area, please join. If you're in Israel, there's a bunch of Siyums happening in different places and also in other places as well. Okay, we're going to get started. Today's daf is sponsored by Avi Mimun in honor of his wife Joy on their 19th year anniversary. Joy, your love for Torah learning is a source of inspiration and blessing for me and the kids. I'm so proud of your accomplishments and wish you to be able to complete the entire Shas. I'm lucky to be married to the most amazing woman in the world. Love you very much. Today's daf is sponsored by Julie Mendelson in honor of her son Raphael, who's drafting into the army tomorrow. May Hashem bless you and keep you. May you return home safely along with all Chayalei Tzava Haganah L'Yisrael. It was amazing to see you finish the Shas Mishna out last month. The next step, Yomi cycle, you're going to join me and finish whole Talmud Be'ezrat Hashem and Bli Neder. Today's daf is sponsored by Mitzi and David Geffen, in loving memory of Mitzi's mother, Ruth Tol Lach, Ruth Bat Miriam Ba'Avraham, Zichrona Levracha, on her 37th year at Tzai. She was a loving mother, mother-in-law, and wife, and a devoted Zionist and wonderful educator in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. All of her 4 children made Aliyah, and her many grandchildren and great-grandchildren all live in Israel. Okay, we're going to get started with the topic in the beginning of our shiur for Amud Aleph is going to be tumat safa. So just to review, we saw in the Mishna yesterday, and let's just review the whole Mishna because it will set up the basis for today. We have a distinction between a Nazir who already finished the process of shaving and a Nazir who didn't yet finish the process of shaving. If the Nazir already finished the process of shaving and finds out later that it turns out they were impure before, then if it was tumat, if he finds out that he was tameh, if it was tum'ah yidu'ah, if it was definite tumah, like it was known, then it would be sotel. If it was tumat tehom, it doesn't cancel the nizirut. But if it was before he shaved, then ben kach u ben kach sotel. Okay, then no matter what, there's no issue of tumat tehom or not tumat tehom. Then the Mishna wanted to explain what's tumat tehom, and then it distinguished between cases again, and it said, if you went to dunk in the mikvah, in the body of water, and it turns out there was a body that was floating in the water. Okay, now the issue here we're going to understand, because here tzafa comes up, and that's how we're going to get to our issue of tzafa. It must be, we're going to learn later, that here they're talking about the issue is not, did you touch the dead body? The issue is, did you, let's say, go under or over the dead body? Okay, did you somehow pass over it? Or under it, which would be tumat ohel. Remember, ohel means 2 things. Either the body's in a tent, everything in the tent is a problem. Or if the body's not in a tent, then the tumah goes all the way up and anyone above or below will become impure. So if you have this body that was tzaka, since that's tumah yidu'ah, we're going to assume that you became tameh. But if it was buried under the ground in the water, in the mikvah, then it depends. If you went just to dunk, to cool off, right, then you're tahol. Why? Because you were tahor to begin with, and you just remain, your status quo remains. If you were litaher mitumat mei, let's say you were a Nazir who became impure to a dead body, and now you went into this body of water to purify yourself, then as katameh tameh, if since there was this dead body, even though it was tumat tehom, that is not going to allow you to purify yourself because you remain in your presumptive status. That's the background for a bunch of things we're going to learn today. So now let's get started. So we saw at the end of yesterday's talk that we're going to learn, and right today we're going to learn where we get this from in the psukim, about what's called tumat safa. If you have a sheretz, which is one of these 8 creepy-crawly creatures that pass on impurity by touch only, and this is the important part, this is why it's going to be distinguished from our Mishna. In the Mishna, we had a body that was safa, and we said we're going to be strict because we're worried maybe there was ohel. But if the issue is touching, whether it's a dead body or it's a sheretz, it's all the same. This is called tumat safa. This is a unique heter, which we're going to darshan out from the psukim, which means that if there's something floating in water and you're not sure if you touched it or not, you were in the water, let's say, and you don't know if you touched it, or it was in a kli and right floating water in a vessel, and you're not sure if something else was in that, something else in the vessel touched it, let's say. So we're lenient. That's the din of tzafa. So that's what we're going to see right now. Safa eina mitama le'inyan sheretz. If there's floating tumah and you're not sure now, you have to say, this is another issue. In general, we say that when it comes to a suffix about impurity, if you touch something or not, there's general rules. If it's in the public domain, then we're lenient. If it's in the private domain, and this is all learned out from Sota, we've seen this a few times, I'm not going to go over it again, but if it's in a private domain, we're going to be strict. So you have to assume that what they're discussing here is it's a suffix in a private domain where you would otherwise be strict, but since it's floating in water, we're not going to be strict about it. That's a unique halacha that was taught in Taharot, in the Mishna and Taharot. And here we're going to quote, we're quoting Abaye here. Is that right? This is the Tosefta in Taharot. Okay, so if something's floating, even in a private domain where we'd normally be strict, and you're not sure, did something come in contact with it, either a person or a utensil, a kli, we're lenient, ditanya, as it says in Abaye. Suffix, I'm just going back to the end of Samach Gimel where we ended yesterday. Suffix tumat safa, bein bekelim bein bekarka Torah. Rabbi Shimon or bekelim tmea bekarka Torah. We're going to basically distinguish machloket, Rabbi Shimon and the rabbis, whether this unique halacha, everyone agrees there's a halacha of tzafa that we're lenient about. If there's tuma floating in water, something tameh like a sheretz or a dead body, whatever it might be, floating in water, we're going to be lenient. But there's a distinction. Is it only if it's a body of water where the water's in the ground? Or is it also if the water's in a vessel? That's the debate between them. My time at the Tanakama, who says it's across the board. How did they get that? Amar Rav Yitzchak bar Rav Dimi. There's two psukim, let's read them first. And these are two psukim about shretzim, these creepy crawling creatures that carry on impurity when they're dead, by the way. They're only impure when they're dead. Al tishaksu et nafshotechem, don't disgrace yourselves. B'chol asher retz hashoretz. Okay, v'lo nitmu b'hem, don't become impure to them. Sheretz hashoretz means a creepy crawling creature that crawls, that wanders. Okay, that could be anywhere. That could be in the water. That could be on land. A different pasuk. This is all in Vayikra, chapter 11. V'zeh lachem hatameh b'sheretz hashoretz ala aretz. There it says shretzim that crawl on the ground, which seems like only on the ground and not in the water. So Rabbi Yisrael bar Rav Dimi is going to say, it says kol hasheretz hashoretz, which sounds kol makom shu shoretz, sounds like anywhere, even in the water. Uktiv ala aretz, but then it says only on land. So haketzad, how do we work this out? Either it's only on land or it's also in the water. It can't be both. Well, they say, how could it be both? Vadai magao tameh. It could be both if it's a case where you definitely came in contact with it. If you touched a sheretz directly or your vessel, you had something that was pure vessel, it touched it definitively. That's going to apply across the board, even kol hasheretz hashoretz. But safek magao tahol. But if you're not sure if you came in contact with it, then again, it would have to be in a private domain. In a private domain, if you're not sure you came in contact with it, if it's on land, it's a problem. That's why it says ala aretz. Kol hasheretz hashoretz ala aretz, okay, or b'sheretz hashoretz ala aretz is talking about in a suffix situation. In a suffix situation, we're only going to be strict on land, but not in water. And then there's no reason, according to him, to distinguish between kli or not kli. So this just gives us the basic law of tzafa and where it comes from. So now they say, the Rabbi Shimon, my time, what's his reason? Amar Ula says, Ktiv ach ma'ayan, uchtiv yitma. This is from the same pasuk. It's a very confusing pasuk. Also in that same chapter in Vayikra. Ach ma'ayan ubor mikveh mayim yetahor. The context here is talking about shretzim. And it says, if there's a stream or a bore or a cistern or a mikveh mayim, it will be tahor. And then it says, v'nogeh b'nivlatam yitma. And if you touch their dead body, you'll be impure. So first it says pure, then it says impure. It's a very confusing pasuk. So comes Ula and he explains, Rabbi Shimon is saying, Ach ma'ayan uktiv yitma, haketzad, how could it be? Safa b'kelim tameh b'karka tahor. Says, the beginning of the pasuk talked about a ma'ayan. Ma'ayan is a body of water that's in the ground. And there it says tahor. So therefore, if it's in a body of water that's in the ground and you're not sure, you're going to be impure. You're going to be pure. If it's in a vessel, that's where it said, even if you're not sure you touched, but if the water was in a vessel, again, it doesn't say this in the pasuk, it's just a way of resolving a seeming contradiction here, then it would be a problem. Okay. What you really have to remember now is just this basic halacha, whether we say in a kli or not in a kli, but there's this basic from here on in, we're going to talk about this concept from here till the end of Amud Aleph, all about this heter safa. So something's floating in the water, whether it's a sheretz, whether it's a dead body, right? We basically say we're going to be lenient. Now, what it means about floating, and you can think about the logic of it, is since it's moving, right, there's less of a chance you came in contact with it because it's moving. When something's stationary, it's more likely if you were near it that maybe you came in contact with it. If it's moving, you could have moved there and moved there, it's less likely. So because of that, they now talk about another case. Tano Rabbanit. Kol hanitalim v'hanigrarin svekan tameh, mipnei shehen kimunachim, v'hanizrakin svekan tahor. Things that are stable, basically, that's the concept here. Things that are stable, and you're not sure you came in contact with them, we're going to say safek tameh. Again, assuming you're in a private domain. And if it's moving like being thrown, it's kind of like safa, because it's not grounded in any way. So then, sfekot tahor. That's the concept here. So what does this mean? This is also a tosefta in Taharot. What is nitalim or nigrarim? If I'm a person and I'm carrying something that's impure, I'm carrying a sheretz, let's say. So either I'm holding it in my hand, or I have it on a leash, and I'm dragging it on the floor. I mean, it's dead, but I'm dragging it on the floor. That's nigrarim. So it's moving, which is like safa, but what? I'm grounded. I'm a human. So because of that, I'm grounding it. So it's considered like it's grounded, like it's on the floor, like it's not moving, because I'm moving it. So therefore, there's more of a concern that somebody touched it. And that's what it says here. Their sepik is considered tameh. So if I'm dragging this thing, and you're not sure if you came in contact with it, or I'm not sure if it hit into some vessels on the ground. So we basically treat this as if it's munach because it's connected with the person and the person is ground, even though I'm moving. But nizrakim, but if it was thrown in the air, then stekan tahor. Then we're going to treat it as if it was safa, okay, even though it's not in the water. Except there's a few exceptions to the rule. Chutz min kezayit min hamet, okay, and this is what we said before. This is only true when we're talking about safek it touched, but not if it's safek ohel, right? Like if there's the kezayit min hamet, which is tame ba'ohel, right? And maybe maybe I threw, okay, I'm trying not to imagine, but I took a piece of a dead body and I threw it, and maybe it went over a vessel, or maybe ma'ahila pnei tuma, or maybe I threw a vessel to the other side, I was playing catch with someone with a vessel, and it might have gone over this dead body, then we're going to be strict, okay? Because that's not a case of tzafa that we're talking about. And also, kol davar shemetameh milamala kilamata la tuye zav v'zava. Zav and zava have a unique halacha, which is, if you remember, a zav and a zavar metameh mishkav u'moshav, something they sit on, something they stand on. And I always think of the princess and the pea with this halacha. There's something called Eben Misama. Some people say this is what it's referring to, or maybe not even, but there's also El Yonoshel Zav and Tonoshel Zav, which means if a Zav is sitting on a bunch of mattresses and there's something underneath the mattresses, that's why I always think of the princess and the pea. Even though they're far away, and even if it's a stone in between, and a stone doesn't even pass on tumat, and also there will be no movement. I won't cause anything to move if there's a stone under me, and then there's all sorts of things underneath that. But it's still matame for a zav. So basically, they're saying when it comes to a zav and a zavat, if there's a sepik about something moving that might have come in contact with me, we're also going to be strict about that because zav and zavat have their own unique halacha. Okay, the main point for our purposes is if it's a sheretz or a dead body or something like that, and it was on the water or it was thrown, and we're not sure if someone physically touched it, maga, like tuma of a sheretz and stolen down from a sheretz. And even if it's in a private domain where we're generally strict, we're going to be lenient. So now come a slew of questions of Rami bar Hama. They're kind of funny. They're kind of absurd. Okay, we're going to get to, they start from maybe being kind of funny, but then they turn into the absurd. So Rami bar Hama asks, we seem to have a lot of questions of his in our Masechet. Usually it's Rabbi Yirmiyah who asks these kind of questions. In our Masechet, it seems to be Rami bar Hama. Meit bikli. Let's say you have a dead body in a vessel. Vikli tzaf al pnei hamayim. Mahu. So the mate is stable in the vessel, but the vessel is floating. So do we say batar kli azlinan? When we talk about the rule of tzafa, we're looking at the kli itself, and the kli is moving. So if there's a suffix, if you came in contact with this dead body that was in the kli, we're going to say it's safa and we're lenient. Oh, but tarmita is lenient. Or do we say, no, it goes by the dead body. And the dead body is in a vessel and it itself is stable in the vessel. It could be the vessel's floating, but it has that, it's munach, it's sitting in the vessel. So which way do we go? In Timtzalomer, now there's a problem with the girsa, okay? Some correct it to lav batar kli azlinan. The text actually says batar kli azlinan, but it makes more sense to say lav batar kli azlinan. If you say we don't go by the vessel, which is floating. Remember, if we don't go by the vessel, what do we say? The dead body is stable in the vessel, even though the vessel's floating, right? It sounds like Superman, right? You've got me, but who's got you? It's kind of like, right, that it might be stable in the vessel, but the vessel itself is floating. So, right? But if you say, we look at the mate itself, and the mate is stable, it's munach in this vessel. So who cares if the vessel's floating? And then we're going to be strict, because again, what does it mean? If it's munach, remember, that means we don't have this special heter of safa, of floating. So if you say, so that's case one. Now we're going to have all these imtim talomer. And if you're going to say this, and you're going to answer the question this way, like a flow chart, then I have another question. So if you say, we don't follow the kli, meaning we follow the dead body, in general, there's some girsa problems in this, and there's different ways of reading it. I'm reading it in one of the interpretations. Meit al gabe sheretz mahu. What if instead of the dead body being in a vessel, the dead body is on a sheretz? Maybe it's just a part of a dead body, right? Like enough that would be matami. So you have a piece of a dead body floating on a creepy crawling creature, which is floating in the water. So now the question becomes, the question is, do we view this all as one, and the dead body and the sheretz are together and they're both floating? Or do we say no, they're not viewed as one, because why? Tumat mate is a tumat of 7 days, and that's tumat shiva. And the sheretz is a tumat erev, which means I just go to the mikveh that day and I wait till the sun sets and I'm done. So there are different levels of impurity. Because there are different levels of impurity, maybe they're viewed as two separate things. Since there are two different levels of impurity, the Gemara says, maybe we say, keman demachta tuma b'klidan. The sheretz compared to the dead body is viewed as if it's a vessel. This is basically, the dead body is on the creature, and the creature is floating in the water. So the creature basically functions as a vessel for the dead body. It's not one and the same, right? Because it's two different tumas. O dilma tumas smichti. Or do we say, it doesn't matter that they have different levels of impurity. This is impure and this is impure. They're both dead, right? One's a dead sheretz, one's a dead body. Why don't we just say, this is one unit and that whole unit is floating. So even if you follow in the case where the dead body was in the vessel and we say the dead body is munach, maybe in this case, we wouldn't view it as munach, because we'd say, maybe this is all one big blob of two dead things that are impure, and put them together and they're both floating. The intim salomer, we're going to keep taking the approach that they're separate, okay? And that the sheretz is viewed as a utensil. If you're going to say, and this is the intim salomer, if you're going to say, this is if the tumah is inside a vessel. Vitame vadai, okay, and then, right, if you're going to say in the previous case, it's not tame vadai, it means we're going to view it as tame. We don't know if someone came in contact with it, right? But we're going to treat it, since we're going to say this dead body is on the sheretz, and the sheretz is like a cleat to the dead body. What about the following case? Now we're switching the dead body with the sheretz, and we're putting, instead of a sheretz, we're putting a nevela, a dead animal, which also has tumah. Sheretz al gabei nevela, so if the sheretz is on top of a dead animal, unevela tzafa mahu, and the dead animal is floating, again, is it sheretz is floating because it's all one and the same with the dead animal? Or is it the sheretz is resting on the nevela, the dead animal, in which case the sheretz is stable? And if the sheretz is stable, we're going to say safek tumah is strict, right? You have to work. So here's the thought, the thought process. It's not like one's tameh makes you tameh for 7 days, like the dead body, and one for only 1 day. Both of these tumot, sheretz and nevela, you're only tameh for the day. You go to the mikveh as soon as you become tameh, or whenever you want that day, and when the sun sets, you're fine. So what we say, inun tumas smichta. This is one big tameh, because it's two different ones, but they're both the same level of impurity. Or, okay, tumas smichtahi. O Dilma, or do we say, Hai Kazayit, Bahai Kadasha? No, they still have different rules about them. Because tumat sheretz is metame and the shiur of a kazayit. Tumat nevela is metame kazayit. Tumat sheretz is metame the size of a lentil. So there's differences between them. So maybe again, they're viewed as two separate entities. If they're two separate entities, the sheretz is resting on the nevela and the sheretz is then stable. So if we're worried, maybe I came in touch with the sheretz, we would have to be strict. Sheretz al gabe sheretz mahu. So let's say you assume sheretz, nevela are two separate. But what if it's a sheretz on top of another sheretz? Even then we have to ask. Do we say, this for sure is the same because it's the same level of impurity. They're the same thing. And therefore it's one unit. And therefore it's all floating. And therefore we're going to be lenient. O Dilma, or do we say no? These are two separate entities. Sheretz number one, sheretz number two. They're not one sheretz. It's two different shretzim. So therefore, we'll view one on top of the other. Again, one is stable. The other one's floating. But again, if you're worried you came in touch with the one on top, which would be the same, right? Worry for either one, but would be a concern. Maybe you came in contact with the one on top, and that would make you impure. The intin tzalomer. Okay, until now, it was kind of reasonable. Now we're starting to get a little off track till we get into the real absurd. If you say sheretz and sheretz are two separate entities, even though they have all the same laws, but they're two different shretzim, so we're going to view the bottom one as a vessel, and therefore the top one is stable. Stable means we're going to be strict with impurities here. What if we have a nevela that dissolved somewhat and it turned liquidy, it liquefied? Now we have a problem because if something liquefies and it's on the water, right? Well, already that's not really considered separating. We need something that's viewed as a utensil, that's kind of holding something, but it's already liquidy. You know, exactly what liquid form, this is a good question. It must be like a thicker liquid form, more viscous. We'll see also examples of other viscous substances. So sheretz agabe nevela shenimocha mahu. I see you're saying that the Shansin says mush. Okay, so it's like a mushy substance. Since it already started to become mushy, it's more like a liquid, in which case it's more like the water. It definitely doesn't serve as a utensil. Or do we say no? It came from a nevela. Nevela was food. So maybe, right, it came from a solid form. So maybe we treat it as something solid. Here comes the more absurd. What if you have a sheretz? Yes, I see the faces. On top of a blob of semen. Okay, now semen again is viscous. So again, hard to imagine why they're discussing this case and how we got to this. But again, they're talking about viscous substances, right? So how would you view that? Now here's the logic. I think what they want to do is nevela to the mush that comes from the nevela. Okay, if we call it mush, okay, or to the liquid nevela. Well, shichat zera comes from a human. So maybe we treat it as ochel now, right? We don't eat humans, but again, it comes from something more solid. But sheretz al gabe bechatat, right? So now, if you're going to say shichat zera maybe could be viewed as a separate thing that's more like a thicker substance that it comes from a human, so maybe we'll treat it that way. What if you have a sheretz on top of the para aduma waters? Why para aduma waters? Well, it's water mixed with ashes. So again, it becomes this thicker substance than water. Would that be considered independent of the water in between it? When assuming, right, again, laws of gravity would say if it's thicker and viscous, it will float. So if it's floating there and on top of that, there's a sheretz, would we view that as the sheretz is, on solid ground or not? And mahu, right? So what's the law? Lo yad'inan teku. This is even more than your usual teku. We don't know the answer to these questions. And teku. Okay, whether lo yadina really belongs there or not is a good question, right? Usually we don't use that kind of language, but we don't know the answer to all of Rami Hama's questions. Okay, so what we did so far, just to review, is we started with this law about safa, okay, where we have this unique halacha of safa. Is it anything floating on all waters or only waters that are in the ground and not waters that are in the vessel? And we proved from the schema how we got to tumat safa in the first place. And then why Rabbi Shimon limits it to only things that are in water, bodies of water that are in the ground and not ones that are in vessels. Then we brought up this issue of what else could be called safa, right? If you're dragging something or holding something, it's not safa. But if you throw something, it is safa, as long as we're talking about safek maga, basically, and not when it comes to a zav, where there's some unique halachas, and therefore this doesn't apply there. And then we started with all of Rami bar Hama's questions, which is what's constituted as a vessel, right? If something's in a vessel that's in the water, how do we view that? And then the whole question became, what if we're not sure if it's viewed as a vessel or not? Okay, so now we're moving back to a different halakha in our Mishnah about Rav Hamnuna. Hama Rav Hamnuna. Nazir va'osa Pesach, we're back to kever tehom. This was a digression into the issue of tzafa, which came up in the Mishnah. And again, in the Mishnah, you have to just remember, because otherwise it's a little confusing, because this seems to go against our Mishnah, because our Mishnah was talking about tumat yedua is where the body is tzafa, and there we are concerned. But that's because, again, we're concerned that maybe you went over it or under it, and it was tumat oha, not tumat maga. When it comes to maga, and that's why they got into this, because they wanted you to know this din of tzafa in our Mishnah is only oel, it's not maga, because maga, we're not going to be concerned. Now comes Rav Hamnuna, and he says the following. Nazir v'os, and again, this is going to seem to contradict our Mishnah. Nazir v'osa Pesach, shalchu b'kever tehom b'shvi'i shelahem. So we had a Nazir and an osa Pesach. Now, what's their shvi'i? We don't have a seventh day by a Nazir. We do if he became impure, and also by Pesach. We have someone who became impure right around now, okay, a few days before Pesach. So about a week before Pesach, he becomes impure. And then on their seventh day, where they're, let's say, they bring the korban Pesach, let's say their seventh day comes out on that day, they go to the mikveh in the morning, right? They sprinkle the para aduma waters, they're pure, but they have to wait still till Harav Shemesh, or the Nazir, okay, also is on his seventh day. On the seventh day, if you remember, the Nazir shaves on the seventh day. When the Nazir finishes his Nazirut, he shaves on the 31st day, the day after. The shaving for the Nazir comes on the seventh day. So now it's not clear whether you're talking before the shaving or after the shaving, okay? But on their seventh day, they go by a kever tehom, okay, and they didn't know. And then they find out later, and then what does this Nazir do? He starts his count again. And the Korban Pesach guy, right, does his Pesach, not knowing that they came in contact with impurity. And theoretically, then this Nazir was Kameh again, and the Osa Pesach did his Pesach while he was impure, and then should have to do Korban Pesach Sheni. Well, it comes from Hamnuna and says if it was on the seventh day and it was kever tehom, Torim, they're pure. Meaning you don't have to do the Korban Pesach again, you don't have to count your Nizigud again, it's all fine. Again, this is where they find out much later. My timer, because tumat tehom is not strong enough to cancel if you already finished your counting. Mativ Rav says, what are you talking about? How could you say that? What did our Mishnah say? Yaradli teher mitumat mei tamei, shechazkat tamei tamei, shechazkat tahor tahor. Didn't we say status quo, right? You retain your status quo. So basically, this Nazir was still in the seventh day of impurity. And this Osa Pesach was in the seventh day of impurity. They were impure. So how could you possibly say that kever tehom doesn't, is fine, ignore it. He was already b'chazkat tamei. So Amar Le, and here's where the shaving comes into play. Rav Hamnuna says, Modin alach ben Nazir shemechusar tiklach. He says, listen, the Mishnah was talking about where he didn't shave yet. So he was still b'chazkat tumah. But my Nazir that I was talking about, and now it didn't say so, but now he's telling you, was after the shaving. So he finished the shaving, which basically means he was totally done with his nizirut of tumah. And therefore he started his nizirut of tahara already, or, was ready to. So he was out of his impurity. And that's why tumat tehom doesn't work. So he didn't have a status of presumptive impurity. So the reaction to this is, Amarle Rava says, Rava says to him, I agree with you also. In other words, in the end, he agrees with this distinction. And he says, and I agree with you, when it comes to the Osa Pesach, if he's not missing anything, right, meaning he went to the mikveh in the morning, he did his Korban Pesach, then he found out that he had been, right, then he came in contact with kever tehom after he'd gone to the mikveh in the morning. Since he wasn't missing anything to do anymore, just like the Nazir with his shaving, so would be the same with the Osa Pesach who went to the mikveh in the morning. He's not missing anything. Which Amalei Abaye, what do you mean he's not missing anything? In other words, you're going to say, this is what we always call a tvul yom. And this is always the question about a tvul yom. Tvul yom means you went to the mikveh, but you're waiting for the sun to set. So Abaye says, how could you call this person presumptive tahara, purity? This person is impure. You're all saying basically, Nazir on day 7 after he shaves, and also he went to the mikveh in the morning also. And the Osa Pesach, both of you agree that as long as they did what they were supposed to do that day, their presumptive status is purity. But it's not. they have to wait. Abaye, but they're still impure as long as the sun hasn't set yet. So how could you possibly say they're in a state of presumptive purity when they still need to wait for the sun to set? To which Rabbi answers him, Amarle, Shimsha mimela arva. Very interesting answer. The sun sets anyway. That is not something that's mechusal something. Usually we say mechusar kipulim, you haven't brought your sacrifice. Mechusal, or you can't bring it yet. Mechusal, tefillah, you haven't done something yet. This person did all the actions necessary for that day. All they need to do is wait for the sun to set, and that's fine. So if they need to wait for the sun to set, and that's fine, then basically what we're saying here is that they've done all they can, and that puts them already in a state of presumptive tahara. You're asking, Becky, about the paraduma, and you're right, the paraduma is done by a tful yom. That's why I said the tful yom issue always comes up because they're unsure where to put him exactly, or her, right? If once you've gone to the mikveh, you're kind of pure, but you're kind of not pure. So this sugya basically says, once you've done what you're supposed to do as a human, your human intervention, you've done everything you're supposed to do, and you're just waiting for the sun to set, you're in a state of presumptive status of purity. And that's the distinction between this halacha of Rav Hamnuna, where he says we ignore kever tehom. That's in those situations. Where our Mishna said we don't ignore kever tehom is when he says, again, what was the Mishna? The Mishna was, you went to the mikveh, presumably you were a Nazir who got impure, and you went to the mikveh to purify yourself on day 7. And then we say, right, cheskat tameh tameh. If there was tumat tehom, we don't care that it was tumat tehom. You were impure. You went to the mikveh to purify yourself, but right, as long as it was before the shaving, you were still presumptive status of impurity. So you can't get out of that when there's a kever tehom. So now we're going to talk about Abaye. Abaye basically seemed to say that Harav Shemesh would be an issue, right? The Gemara, because that's how he questions Rav. But the Gemara is going to say that Af Abaye Hadran. Abaye actually changed his mind about this. Okay, apropos for today, a day in Israel of time to sit and talk and communicate and people to concede to others, on both sides. So not taking any sides on the issue, just saying that, right? We need to communicate and maybe change our opinions. Here's a good example of Abaye changing his opinion. So Abaye heard what Rebbe had to say and changed his opinion. How do we know this? We're going to go to a totally different topic where the same issue is going to arise. And Abaye is going to be on the side of Rava, of basically saying that, we ignore the Harav Shemesh element because it's not needed by, there's no need for human intervention. Ditan, as it says in the following bright background to the sugi. A woman gives birth to a boy or a girl, right? There's a different amount of days where the woman has blood after she bleeds after birth. Women bleed after birth. The first 7 days for a boy, 14 days for a girl are considered blood of impurity. That means she's not allowed to be with her husband, and it's impure blood for all sorts of purposes. From day 7 for the boy till day 40, or from day 14 for a woman who gives birth to a girl till day 80, the blood that she sees in those days is called dam toha. She actually goes to the mikveh after day 7 or 14. She's permitted to her husband. We don't do this anymore because nowadays all women are safek zavot, and we don't do this. But in those days, by Torah law and even later days in rabbinic law, there were even in the Rishonim, there were disagreements about whether we keep this or not. But it's called dam toha. Any blood she sees is pure blood. What does that mean? It means that she can have relations with her husband, but the one thing she can't do is, it's like the mitzvah we were just talking about, that she has to wait to bring korbanot. She's not permitted to bring her korbanot until she finishes these 80 days. Then she can eat sacrificial meat, right? We talked about the Nazir can then eat the thing, and the mitzvah can then eat, right? we have all those days, right? Is then allowed to eat kodashim. She can't eat sacrificial meat all that time. So day 40 or 80, 40 for a boy, 80 for a girl, she finishes her days. Day 81, she goes to the Beit HaMikdash and she brings sacrifices. There's a debate about whether she also has to go to the mikvah before that. Okay, and I'm saying this because later on they're going to talk about this mikvah. Some people are going to say it must be a case where she didn't go on day 14, okay, to the mikvah, and she pushed it off till now. But other people say, no, we're talking about the second tefillah that some people think that she needed to do at day 80, or basically on day 80. Okay, even though they're going to talk about it on day 81, we'll get to all that later. Now, Now ignore the boy case, because this would never happen if she had a boy, because by day 40, she's already done, but, bringing her sacrifice. But another case where a woman has to bring a sacrifice, and then she brings this sacrifice, what we call the korban yoledet. Now, if she miscarries, and she's been pregnant already for 40 days, she also has to bring a korban yoledet. Now we're going to talk about a case where the woman miscarried so she got pregnant right away, soon after, had a 40-day pregnancy, and then miscarried within the 80 days, or maybe right after the 80 days. So that's our case. That's why it can't possibly be a boy, because you wouldn't have 40 days. So here goes the bride. Yom melot tavi. If it was on Yom melot, meaning the 81st day, the pasuk says, u'b'melot yemei tahara, when she finishes, completes the days of purity, leben or lebad, she brings this korban. Okay? So if she has a miscarriage on day 81, before she brings her sacrifice, she actually has to bring two separate sacrifices, one for the miscarriage, one for the birth. But toch melot lo tavi. But if the miscarriage happens within the 80 days, then she doesn't have to bring a separate sacrifice. Okay? She brings one sacrifice that covers both. This is a unique halacha that you can have one sacrifice cover two births, and maybe even more than two births, we're going to see. Now, think about it. When is she going to bring the sacrifice, though? Not on day 81, because she has to wait now 80 days from the miscarriage. First of all, maybe it's a girl, so you have to push it off, because 40 days, you probably don't know whether it was a boy or a girl. Or I'm sure you don't. So you would have to push it off. I don't know all the details. I'm just guessing, but you have to push it off. Certainly in those days, they didn't know. Let's put it that way. You have to push it off now till day 81 of that. Okay, so now we can have a scenario where you got pregnant a third time and it's still within the days before you were obligated to bring your sacrifice. So now they say, we understand for sure you're not going to bring on a birth that's before the days, before you finish the day, that you're not going to bring a separate one if it's within the first 80 days of the first birth. But some people get rid of these next two words, so I'll get rid of them. But you might have thought that you bring on a birth that's after the first 80 days, but still within the 80 days of the miscarriage, There's 80 days of the birth and 80 days of the miscarriage. So again, you might have thought, let's say you have a third birth here, which is the second miscarriage, which is within 80 of the second one, but not within 80 of the first. So since this is all going from your first slew of korban and you're already past melot, maybe you would bring a separate sacrifice for this. Talmud lomar, u'b'melot yemei tahara, b'yom melot tavi, toch melot lo tavi. They say no. It's all learned from the words b'melot yemei tahara. And since now your melot got pushed off today, 160 or whatever it might be, some later date, if you have another miscarriage within that time, you still only bring one sacrifice. Okay, you probably forgot why we're here, because we already got totally sidetracked. We're here because we want to show that Abaye changed his mind about this Harav Shemesh. He thought Harav Shemesh was an issue, and then he's going to learn from Rava, And in this case, he's going to be on the other side, on the Rava side. Just Harav Shemesh, since you don't do anything, it's an irrelevant fact. So now Rav Hamnuna wants to explain this halacha, the first halacha, which is why it's all dependent on day 81 or day 80. Again, you miscarry day 80, you're going to bring only one sacrifice. You miscarry day 81, you're going to bring two separate sacrifices, even though you haven't brought your sacrifice yet. So comes Rav Kahana and says, Amar Rav Kahana, Shane hacha de mechasre korban. What's the difference between 80 and 81? In both cases, you haven't yet brought your first sacrifice. So what's the difference? So the point is on day 80, you can't even bring your sacrifice yet. You have to wait till the next day or day 70 or whatever day it is you miscarry, since you haven't been obligated to bring your korban. So it's all considered one and the same. Day 81 already, starting from the morning, you're already supposed to bring a sacrifice. So you've your obligation is kicked in, and therefore it's already considered something different. To which the Gemara says, but wait, what if you had a case? Hatamnami. Now, it's only a theoretical case. It's not like every case would be like this. Hatamnami mechasra harav shemesh. Theoretically, you could have a case where on day 81, let's say you didn't go to the mikveh. Now, again, here's the question. What mikveh didn't you go to? Either you never went to the mikvah on day 14 and you just pushed it off. And now it wasn't really relevant to you, you just didn't care. And now you need to go to the mikvah because you certainly can't bring your korban if you haven't been to the mikvah from then. It's a little bit of a hard commentary. And that's why I said more likely we're talking about on day 80, you're supposed to go to the mikveh. And what if you pushed it off a day and you didn't do it? In other words, there could theoretically be a case where you would be on day 81 and not yet obligated in your korban. And basically 81 would then be considered the same as 80 for this purpose. So it could be, or, where you, again, what they're saying is though, but here's the key. Let's say you went to the mikvah on day 81 in the morning, but now you can't bring your korban that entire day because you have to wait till Harev Shemesh, and only tomorrow on day 82 you could bring it. Would we say then, if you miscarried on that day, that you would bring one korban for everything? No, because the source there depended at all on the day. It didn't depend on whether you've gone to the mikvah or not, or whether you've gone to the mikvah that morning or whether you went to the mikvah the day before and you're already finished. So theoretically, you could have a case where you went to the mikvah on the morning of 81. And at this point, you can't bring the korban then. And yet we still obligate you separate korbanot for both, for the birth and the miscarriage. Even though, right, hatamnami mechasra harev shemesh. So, Amar le Abaye says, shimsha mimela arva. No, the harev shemesh is not a factor because it's going to happen anyway. So it's as if you're chayav your korban, even though you're really not. But because what's missing is not anything on your part that's missing, therefore that's not an issue. Okay, that's all to prove that Abaye changed his mind. Presumably Rava convinced him and he changed his mind. Next Mishnah, which will only start today, and we'll get into more tomorrow. Okay, the reason why we're getting to this Mishnah and some of the other Mishnah at the end of this chapter, okay, is because we're still in laws of tumat and tahara, so you could connect it that way. But the real reason seems to be the Mishnah before, and we kind of didn't pay too much attention to these words. We even said that the Rush had a weird interpretation of them, like didn't understand them in their typical way. But we said cheskata tamei tamei cheskata or tahol shte raglayim ledavar. What is raglayim ledavar? It seems logical, right? It seems hard to say that you went to the mikvah, there was a dead body underneath, and we're going to let you get out of your status of tumah, right? It's more like this is logical. So here also, not today, but tomorrow we'll see in the continuation of the Mishnah, they're going to say raglayim ledavar, and it seems like these Mishnah got together because they all said the words raglayim ledavar. You find a dead body buried, this is very interesting, buried in the way that Jews bury. Okay, apparently they cross the arms over the heart. That's how they bury people. And if you find bones, it's very interesting to think, right? How do you know it's a Jewish body or not? It's the way that they bury the body. There's a bunch of things they do that you could tell by the way the body's buried, whether it's a Jewish body or not. So if you find a meit b'tchila that's buried like that, you can see the Mefarish says, V'lo yoshev, v'lo rosho ben yerechata, v'lo harug. Okay, he says something a little bit different. I saw a commentary that said something else. I'm trying to remember where I saw it. Anyway, there's certain signs that indicate that it was a Jewish burial, and you find it in a random place. Now, we don't want bodies buried in random places because they'll cause impurity to people. People won't even know that they're impure. So if you find this kind of thing, and the other issue is you're not allowed to move dead bodies. But in this way, you're allowed to do it. You take it out and you take the tfusa. You dig down like about 3 tvachim and you take everything that's in there with it. Okay, this is called tfusa. We saw this before. There was a case where we said you don't take the tfusa, right? Sometimes you do. In this case, you take the tfusa and you take it all with you and you rebury it in a real proper place. This is to avoid tumah. And also, we generally don't move bodies, but the assumption is that if this body was buried on the road somewhere, people just buried it temporarily with the assumption that, they couldn't bury it for whatever reason in a cemetery. They were hoping someone would move it later. Shnayim, if you find 2 dead bodies, in other words, you're supposed to really search the area to see maybe there's some ancient cemetery underneath the ground that you didn't know about. So if you find 2 bodies, still not lamvet fusatan, you take them both out. But as soon as you find 3, masash losha, and this we saw already, it's called shkunat kfarot. You might remember, we saw this. If between the 2 is from 4 cubits to 8 cubits, okay, that was the space in which they would bury people at this distance, then harezo shkunat kfarot. If they're buried with more distance, then we assume it's not. But here you can assume there must be some ancient cemetery, in which case you really have to, and then we're going to see how far you have to go checking for bones and all that. And then obviously you can't move them because this in and of itself is a cemetery. And then you can't move something from a proper cemetery. Then there's ways can be done. That's a whole other question. But in general, we don't do this. So we're going to stop here and just do a quick review of our daf. We started all with this tumat safa, which I already reviewed the whole back and forth there. So we're just going to say for right now, we dealt with this floating tumah, which again, In a private domain where we normally be strict, we're going to be lenient. If we're not sure you came in contact with something that was floating, all different questions of floating. Then we have Rav Hamnuna, who basically seems to say something that contradicts our Mishna. In the end, we say that according to Rav Hamnuna, tumat tehom will be a problem if it's before the shaving. If it's after the shaving, where you've done everything that you can do, like on Pesach, you went in the mikvah already, then we're not concerned for tumat tehom. If we find out later that your Pesach was done and you were tameh, or your nizirut was, you went back and became a Nazir, started your days all over again and finished, and now you find out I was tameh. No, we're not worried about that. Rava ends up agreeing with him. Abaye asked this question, what about Harav Shemesh? You're still missing something, to which they say that's not really significant, to which they say, wait, Abaye, even though we thought maybe Harav Shemesh was significant, we see he changed his mind, and that's where we see this case of the woman. And here he's not concerned about Harav Shemesh, and that we finished that sugya, and then we went to this thing about the shchuna kfarot. When you find a dead body somewhere, right? At what point does it become shchuna kfarot where you can't move the body, and at what point is it right? One or two, basically you can say, oh, we have to move these bodies, and then you take out more stuff with it. That's called the tfusa. That's it for today. Wishing everybody a great day. We're almost done. I know this tumat stuff is not simple, not for me either, just so you should know. And we're almost done with it. Luckily, our very last Mishna at the end of Samach Vav Amud Aleph at the bottom is finally going to get us back to other topics of Nazir, and we'll end on a bit of a different note. But we have to bear in mind that until we get there, we still have another daf and a half of tumat to get through before we finish our Masechet. Then we're getting into Sota, which is very different and not the same kind of Gemaras. Wishing everyone a great day.